Hello, hello. Welcome back to another episode of Shelf Care with Alicia. I'm Alicia Johnson, a licensed therapist who loves to read, and I get to read all the self-help books to tell you what I like and don't like, and you can decide for yourself if it's worth your time and money reading these books. Today's I'm super excited to talk about. It's one that I've read a few times now. I took the dust jacket off. This one's called Hold Me Tight by Dr. Sue Johnson. Here's another little Hold Me Tight, Seven Conversations for a Lifetime of Love, Dr. Sue Johnson. May she rest in peace. So, this book is actually one that I've read a handful of times, and my thoughts have changed over times. So, I went to a very emotion focused, like anti-CBT grad program. And so everyone loved all the anything like emotional. And I was like, in my little healing journey, I was like, no, this all sucks. So I read this book first in, gosh, grad school. And I saw the appeal of it, but I was like, I'm never going to read this again. I'm never going to use this material ever. Like my angsty teen came out and I was just like, this sucks. And it just wasn't my jam. Then I opened my own private practice a few years later and started seeing couples, and I was like, okay, I gotta read some of these books again. And I loved it. And then I've recently reread it and love it even more. So I feel like this is one where, as I've healed some of my own stuff and evolved as a person, this book has become incredible. So, what the heck is it about, though? This is a book, I would say it's more of a relationship self-help book than an individual. Like, yes, there's going to be things that you can still take away if you are single or your partner's not as interactive. There's still going to be some exercises that can be helpful, but I think for this book to really be as transformational as it can be, it's really a relationship book. And it talks about emotionally focused therapy. It doesn't talk about it in a ton of therapist-y way, but that is what her kind of brain thinks about, which really is just fancy stuff for attachment theory and about how our relationships are based on emotional bonds that we create with our partners, as well as how our previous emotional bonds with other people and attachments have also impacted us. So I love it. I've become much more of an attachment fan, of an emotion fan. Anyone who knew me in grad school would probably laugh at those statements because I was a very different human. So this book is organized around, like the title kind of said it, seven conversations. So it starts with a little bit of background, it dives into some different concepts. There's, case examples, there's assessment, because I love those. And there's kind of seven conversations that build on each other in depth and they kind of deepen as you go on. So each kind of chapter has its own conversation that it focuses on, and then within that, there's reflection questions, examples, um, little checklist, practice things, all of that for each of those questions. So, like I said, the main point of this book is really about strengthening that emotional bond between partners so they can be open, attuned, and responsive to each other. So if you know anything about attachment theory, they are so interwoven that there's a huge attachment underlying in a lot of these things. I gave this book 5 stars. I don't actually remember if I do my stars in the beginning or at the end, but I liked this one so much. I wanted to kind of share my journey that I really wanted to make sure you knew, I gave it 5 stars. And like I said, I've read this book a few times, and before I was gonna probably give it maybe a 2 or a 3. But yeah, my appreciation for the book has completely changed not just in the work that I do, but in, like I said, my own journey that I've gone through with tapping into my own attachment work and my own emotion work, where I've been able to not just clinically take things away that I can use with my clients, but be oh, I can take this away in my relationships as well. So let's dive into some of the things that I love because I did give it 5 stars. Honestly, one of my favorite things is how like kind of revolutionary this book was and like how EFT is. And again, if you knew me at any point in my early career, the fact that I'm praising EFT as a revolutionary, oh my gosh. My old like supervisors would be like, "Who are you and what have you done with Alicia?" But for real, so much of not just relationship therapy, but therapy in general was really skill-based and behavior based and like thought based. Now, I am a ride or die with narrative therapy. And if you know about narrative therapy, it's all about the messages that we tell ourselves. It's our thoughts are impacting our thoughts, feelings, emotions, all that stuff. So I'm still a belief-based therapist, but before I was such an anti-emotion therapist. And I was like, it's just like whatever, it's fluffy. And now I'm like, oh, that's really a game changer. So, not just therapy in general, but then especially couples therapy. Gottman does some great stuff. I've reviewed a few of his books. He does tie in some emotion stuff, but he does it more in like a subtle way. Whereas like Sue Johnson, the emotions are at the forefront. Like there's no fluff. But it goes beyond just how to fight better. It goes beyond learning a communication skill, problem solving skill, conflict resolution. And a lot of us in couples therapy, that's what we go in for. If you ask any couples therapist, besides maybe a few like niche specialized ones, all couples are going in like, I want to communicate better. We want to work on communication. And like, yes, but the EFT was a huge game changer in going beyond the skills. And we're helping this communication by actually building this emotional connection and addressing the deeper issues. So it was pretty revolutionary for its time. And I think, no, I can't even say I appreciated it then. I think I was just so like in my teen angst, I couldn't even appreciate that. But I can appreciate that now, even though EFT is still not like my primary thing that I do. I have a newfound appreciation for it. Okay, so there's my little tangent there. I think another thing that I really liked is she does a great job describing like conflict and fighting. So we're not talking about abusive, controlling, or harmful behaviors. We are not excusing that. That is very much not okay. We are not blaming the victim or survivor for anything, any abusive behaviors or patterns that they are in. That is all on the abuser or the perpetrator. But in general, conflict, in a normal, healthy disagreement that all couples have, both partners do play a role. And it's not about blame or putting all the blame and the fault on one person. It talks about conflict in a very normal way. Like, yep, we're gonna have disagreements, we're gonna have these things. Um, let's kind of look underneath the argument and look at the real issue. Again, we're not applying this type of language and grace and normalcy to abusive, controlling, harmful, toxic things. We are not excusing those things at all. Um, so yeah, there's like good examples of how a lot of couples will talk about like doing the dishes or the frequency of intimacy or something. And if we get stuck there, or even if we focus on the communications aspects of that, we might be missing a lot. And Sue Johnson in this book really helps on getting to the root of things like, do I matter to you? Can I count on you? Are you here with me? Will you continue to be here with me in these hard things? So that's where like attunement and attachment really comes in. And I think a lot of relationship books can miss that. And this, and again, Gottman, I think also does a really good job. So I think those two folks are always folks that I'm always going to recommend to the couples that I work with or that I see. Um, I kind of already hinted at this, but because of her view on like the pattern in conflict and disagreements, that's that's very systemic. If you are new to my world, systemic is kind of, or you, if you're new, you won't know that I love things that are systemic, meaning it's not just like this happens, there's all these kind of multitude of factors. And so by looking at the couple cycle, that in and of itself is systemic. We're not saying this person is bad, you're the bad guy, I'm right, you're wrong. It's we both contributed to this, we both got caught in this, we both can kind of do something. So it gently calls people out, but not in a blaming way. It's really helping folks take accountability. But more importantly, it helps people like understand the why too. Like instead of just saying, well, you are getting really defensive or you're being really blah blah blah. It's like, well, this is why. Like it's becoming from a protective place. That's where some of that attachment stuff and that underlying stuff kind of comes into play. And that just adds to the whole layer of systemic stuff. So I loved it. There is another part in the book that's, I think, a huge, if you could like take away anything, there's this little acronym. I'm a sucker for an acronym, a questionnaire, little exercises, like a little, what are they called? Like if you put me in like a little profile box, I love all that. But an acronym is really helpful because she literally is like an expert on this stuff, so she's gonna know all of it. If we're reading this for the first time, we're not gonna be like, wait, what were those really important things that I want to focus on or think about? Especially if we're thinking about stress or overwhelm or these other emotions that are going on. An acronym is nice and digestible for our brain. I love an acronym. So one of the important acronyms in this book is called R, which means accessibility, responsiveness, and engagement. Those are the key factors for that emotional connection. And they stand for the accessibility is can I reach you? So if we're in a time of stress or conflict, can I reach you? Responsiveness, is that R? Can I rely on you to respond to me emotionally? And then E is the engagement piece. Do I know that you value me and will stay close? So those are kind of like the questions we can ask ourselves. Don't worry, there's a questionnaire in the book to see how accessible, responsive, and engaged you feel with your partner. And don't worry, if you score low, that's kind of the point of the book, right? Like, we don't get taught this stuff. Like I said, this is kind of a revolutionary way of thinking about things. And so many of us, our parents weren't taught this stuff, our grandparents weren't taught this stuff, they weren't teaching this stuff in schools. So if we're reading this book, it's because we don't know any differently and we want to be better for ourselves and for our partners. I would say kids these days are starting to talk more about emotions, but like I'm a millennial, so my generation and up, we didn't get emotion intelligence stuff in school. And so this isn't to be like, oh my gosh, your relationship is doomed if you score really low. No, you scored low, which is probably why you picked up this book. And now we can grow on these things and deepen this relationship. So even when things like seem bad or like, oh my gosh, this is awful, she's like, no, don't worry. We good. And I think that's a really gentle way of diving into some of this stuff because I feel like sometimes with really deep work, it can feel like really overwhelming and really scary. And she takes a really like gentle, compassionate approach. So I really like that. And it comes in really early in the book too. I think it's like the first or second chapter. So you can take that away super quick and super digestible. Okay, the other things that I liked in this book were the examples and stories. I think sometimes self-help books always choose like the cliche stories or the ones that like always work out great, but she's very intentional with the ones she chose. You get to see how some of the different cycles play out, but also like where they would get stuck because that's realistic, right? It's not, oh my gosh, I learned this one question and I did it once and now we're all better. No, it actually was like, okay, we keep doing this, we see this progress, and then here's where we're stuck. Because that's what happens for a lot of relationships is you see a little bit of progress and then we might revert a little bit, or we might find a new stuck point. It's not always this nice, like, I'm suddenly better and all my trust issues are gone and I feel so incredibly close. So I like that they highlighted the tiny changes and sometimes the setbacks, but ultimately, like, this is part of the process. This takes time, and you keep practicing, that big change is also possible. So it just seemed more realistic and like hopeful, actually, because I feel like if you're reading this as like almost maybe like you're more in a rock bottom space and you're not seeing that quick progress like some books show, that can be really defeating. So I really appreciated that. Okay, so then the rest of the book is those seven conversations that I was talking about, and I liked most of them. I can see why she included all of them. I can appreciate all of them. Maybe it's just because I'm not a full-on, emotion focused therapist, but I won't personally use all seven in like my own counseling or in my own life, but I think they're helpful and I definitely see how they build on each other. So it starts kind of by like identifying this cycle and this pattern that we're in with our partner. It talks about finding triggers and raw spots from our past, going into some ways of deepening that emotional connection, being more vulnerable, practicing forgiveness, and then creating new patterns. So I like all of that stuff. I like that it gives language to people because, again, most of us are not taught these things, we're not modeled these things. And I like that. I'll get into some of the conversations that I didn't super love in the end, but overall, I think even if you take away just some of those things, each of those conversations have practices, some have scripts, some help you like identify like which little category you're in. It gives you some like questions to like think about yourself, possibly share with your partner. So all in all, really great book that balances like some of the practical stuff with some of that emotional stuff. So there's that. Next, I love how a lot of this book, in a kind of a sneaky way, is actually a lot about accountability. And I love that because I think when we go into like couples counseling, we're like, I want to be validated and I want the other person, like, this is how our brains work in our society. We're not in a systemic world. We're very much like this linear, like this and this, good and bad, black and white. We're like, they are the bad guy, and my therapist is gonna see how like perfect and amazing I am. And yes, it validates you and your experiences, but really like holds you accountable. It also does it in a super vulnerable way, which again, if you would have asked me like grad school me, I would have been like, ew, vulnerability. We don't need that in therapy. Just kidding. I knew we did. But like, I was like, there's other ways of getting to our beliefs and all this stuff. And this one is just like some gut checks that I loved. There's one line that I wanted to share that like really stood out to me that I think is the core of this book. And she's sneaky, like she does it in a way where, it doesn't start out here, but it's really, can you love me even with all of my problems? Oh, I'm gonna slow that down. Can you love me even with all my problems? That's attachment. That's a relationship. We're so scared of being ourselves, of being too much, of being alone, of all these things. So we don't bring something up. We don't want to shake things up. We want to protect ourselves. There's all these different things because we're terrified that our person isn't going to love us because we're human and we all have problems. Like, it's going to be impossible for you to not have a baggage. Can someone love you with those? 10 out of 10. I was like, oof, I think I had to like set the book down and was like, I need to go get a glass of water or something. Like that was surreal. So that's really, if you want to like be seen and chosen, this book is going to put you on that journey of doing that work so you can have those things in your relationship. Okay, moving on. Let's see, what else did I like? There's also a lot about forgiveness and repair. I think that's interesting because we hear those words. a lot, right? Which is forgive, forgive. One, I think forgiveness often gets misconstrued, and I'm a big language person, so how we use that word and like what it actually means, I think differs. And so she also, for my behavioral folks, my skill-based folks, there's also a six-step like forgiveness process. So it's actually not about pretending that nothing happened. Shocker, that doesn't actually work and doesn't change and help us move into this more sustainable pattern. But really, it's about processing what happened and then safely moving forward. That's truly forgiveness. It's not, well, I said I'm sorry, so like we just need to be done with it, or it wasn't a big deal. Whatever, move on, shove it under the rug because guess what? If we shove it under the rug, eventually it's all gonna come out, right? So I like how she tackled that. And like the repair piece of it too. Like it's not just the act of saying sorry, but like there's kind of what we go beyond that to truly reconnect after something. So overall, love all those things. I've actually used a lot of those things with couples that I've worked with. I don't really work with a lot of couples now, but I still will like work with some concepts and like use some of this language with my individuals who are working on some relationship stuff. I really recommend this book for folks who want that relationship stuff, especially if both partners are willing to do the work because it's very skill based, but also a huge focus on that emotion and that attachment, which I think blends a lot of things and fills in a lot of gaps that other stuff don't. Okay. So I still recommend it. However, it's me. I'm supposed to criticize and share things, so there's things that I didn't love as well. Honestly, most of it is just like personal preferences though, so it's not like anything like no red flags or anything super wild. But I want you to know so that if your brain is like my brain, you're aware of it and you can still make this decision for yourself. So the biggest dislike for me, you might laugh at me, is some of the links. Again, I'm a language person, but some of the language she uses was just not my vibe. She uses a lot of metaphors, which I actually love a metaphor. It's very narrative therapy and it's just like very palatable for our brains to use a metaphor. But a lot of like the conflict cycles and patterns are in languages of like dancing and like tangos and polkas and all this stuff, which I 1,000% like get for the metaphor. Like totally makes sense. I read a lot of fantasy books and they also describe like fighting um as like physical like fighting with a sword and like all that stuff as dancing as well. So like I totally see the metaphor, but I like there's like these she like names three of them and they're just kind of silly names and I can't say them seriously. And so like if I can't take them seriously, then I'm not gonna be able to deliver that to a client really well. Or like I've had clients even read that and be like, I didn't really know what that meant. That seemed really weird. That seemed kind of stupid. So if you read this and you know you might not like that metaphor language or your partner might not like that, guess what? It's just a word. You can change it. So when I work with my clients on, there's like these three kind of patterns you can get into. And then she has dances for each of them. There's like a polka protest, something tango, and then I don't remember the third one. Anyway, you can rename them, right? So I'll just say, well, your guys' cycle or pattern. And then we can create a name that actually works for them and kind of like helps include them into that process. So I'll say, Sue Johnson uses this word. I might use, just like this pattern or this cycle. What's a name that works for you guys? And so if you read this and you're like, "Ugh, I'm not going to say polka," that's fine. Come with a different name. Like, don't let that be the thing that turns you away because like the bulk of the book is so much better. Okay, the other thing I don't love, and this is probably a criticism with most books that I read, it's pretty rare for me to find a self-help book that doesn't have generalized language. Generalized language are things like always, never, have to, must be, things like that. So it's very common in how we talk, how I write, but I'm not a fan of it because my brain, like that angsty teen is like, well, it's not always. It's not never. What if this? And so in my own writing, I try to use more most of the time, sometimes, often, can be just a little bit more inclusive language. So it's not a huge nitpicking thing, but it's something that stands out to me. And when a book doesn't have that language, I'm like, ooh, okay, I'm gonna keep reading and recommending this. So like one example is here's the exact words. We cannot create a strong, secure connection unless we do certain things. I guess that's not a direct quote. Um, but basically, oh gosh, what was she talking about? It was like, yeah, you can't have like a physical connection if you don't do these things. You can't have a strong, secure connection unless you completely like are completely open with this person. And so again, like I get the point that she's making and I can like agree to an extent, but also absolute language is just not always the best and it loses nuance. And it's like, I just can think of some of my clients' brains who then would be like, oh, so does this mean like it's bad, right? And so if we put these like little boxes in and we can't fit in that box, then we feel like, well, I guess none of this just makes sense, right? Like kind of amplify that all or nothingness. Anyway, you can disagree. That's cool. Um, the other thing I was kind of nitpicky about is like 90% of the book was super digestible in like not big therapist-y words, not a lot of like researchy words. It was just someone who doesn't have a psychology degree could pick this up and take that away. And then there was like this random part in the middle of a book, in the middle of the book, talking about like the science behind emotions. And it felt like I was reading like a thesis, like a grad school thesis paper. I was like, ew, this is not my jam. So if you also don't want to read like a research article, don't worry. It's a small bit of the book. You can honestly skim through it. Um, the rest of the book is not like that. So I'd say get 90% of the book, super amazing, super relatable, easy to digest, easy to understand. And there's like that little bit where I was like, oh, what the heck did I just read? So don't worry if you get to that point, like it goes back. It doesn't like trick you and be like, haha, this was normal and now we're a textbook. Nope, it's just that little section. Okay, and then there was a part on physical intimacy. And again, I get why she included physical intimacy in the book. Um, I think a lot of couples kind of that's a maybe more easier or obvious kind of thing to notice when a relationship starts to lose some of the connection. But how am I trying to word this? I think she oversimplifies, or no, she simplifies, or oh, anyway, I think she blends like too much of the emotional connection with the physical stuff. Um, Obviously, emotional connection impacts physical intimacy. I get that. It's also not the only factor though. So it just felt like because she's so focused on emotional connection, that like that is the most important thing for everything. And again, I think it loses some of the nuance, especially around intimacy, where it's not always that, right? Like a lot of the times it is. And of course, it's going to impact if we're not feeling emotionally connected. That can have a huge impact on our physical intimacy. But like there's other books that just describe it a little bit better. I think a lot of the like Come As You Are, some of those books, I think I'm trying to look at there's another one I read recently. That just dive into some of the nuances. And again, emotional connection is a piece of the puzzle, but I think Sue Johnson is like, this is the whole puzzle. And I was just a little cautious about that. So, um, the other thing, I normally don't do like cautionary tales. Sometimes I do, mainly I do if there's like trauma stuff. And so this is kind of another, um, just like trauma awareness piece that wasn't really covered in the book. This book could be intense for folks who've experienced relational trauma or abuse. So, relational trauma could be with a partner, but it could also be with a parent, a sibling, um, anything that just has that personal connection to it. I think it's still a really helpful healing book, but if we maybe haven't done a lot of work on ourselves, to explore that vulnerability, to bring up those attachment wounds, to acknowledge and explore those emotional needs, that can bring up a lot of stuff. And I just want to make sure, like, you know what you're getting yourself into. So, like, do I believe that you have the capacity to be able to handle that? Of course. However, it might be helpful to have like a self-care plan, slow it down, take breaks, or even like you'd use this book with a therapist or something, just so you can take it in a way that makes sense for you and your body. So trust yourself, trust your gut. Um, it is, I think, still a helpful book, but just wanting folks to be fully aware of what they're getting themselves into. Okay, so ultimately, who would I recommend this book for? Honestly, almost anyone, which isn't a common recommendation for me. I'm pretty picky. I do have some caveats, so don't worry. I think anyone who wants a deeper understanding of their relationship and is willing, keyword willing, to do some honest reflection, and their partner is also able to, 1000% get this book. I think it's going to change your life. If your partner isn't willing to engage, I think you can still get some stuff from it, but really, like, it's about the connection. So it's hard to build the connection when only one side of the cycle is working on. There can be still some things like you bring up and you can still move like the needle forward, but I think for it to be truly transformational, it's you and your partner willing and able to do that hard work. And then no notes. It's not necessarily like a super quick, like, here are these little tips and here's these communication skills. Yes, you're getting some skill-based things. You're getting practice. You're getting reflection questions. You're getting all these things, but those things are to help build that deeper stuff. So if you're not really wanting that, I could see someone being like, whoa, this is not my jam. Kind of like me in grad school. But this is one, this and the Gottman book are two of the books that I recommend most to clients. Depending on where they're at, what they're looking for, Hold Me Tight, and then the Relationship Cure are two of the books that I recommend to pretty much everyone. This one is very compassionate, practical. I love the language it gives people. It's not really about fixing your relationship. It's more about strengthening things, nurturing things. And so being a being a language person, that's really important to me. So yeah, I really like it. I'm trying to think if there's anyone else like I wouldn't recommend it to, but no, I think really as long as you're willing and able to kind of do some of that work, it's going to be really good for you. I'm excited to hear what your thoughts are though. So if you've read it, let me know your thoughts. If you read it and you're like, oh my gosh, that was trash, let me know your thoughts. Because again, I read this in grad school and I didn't love it. I appreciated parts of it, or I could see the appeal for what it was, but it wasn't my jam. So let me know. And then if there are books that you've heard of that you're interested in that you don't know if it's worth your time or not, let me know. I don't currently have my next book planned, so let me know what you are interested in and make sure to like and subscribe for the updates on my future book reviews. So thank you so much. Keep reading and take care of yourself.